Minimalist training is the easiest way to gain muscle quickly after 40. In this video, I'm going to lay out an entire minimalist training roadmap you can use to gain muscle without spending hours in the gym or following complicated workout routines. My name is Rio and I help busy men over 40 gain muscle and lose fat with minimalist training. Over the last decade, I've transformed my body from this to this. And while I'm not 40 myself, I coach men who are, and I know exactly what works for your body at this stage of life. If you're over 40, chances are you're not trying to become a bodybuilder and win Mr. Olympia, right? You're just trying to look good in and out of clothes, maintain your energy and youthfulness, and feel confident and capable as you get older, right? And between family, work, and everything else on your plate, the last thing you want is some complicated workout routine that eats up your limited time and mental bandwidth. That's exactly why minimalist training is so powerful and why it's what I teach to my over 40 clients. It's the simplest, most sustainable, most practical, and most no bullshit way to build muscle and get in shape, and it fits into the busiest of schedules. Everyone in the fitness industry makes it seem like weight training is rocket science and that you need to treat it like a full-time career in order to get any results, but that could not be further from the truth. Most people in this space have a completely distorted view of reality. The truth is, you only need about 1 or 2 hours per week in the gym to see incredible results, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do. The first place to start on our minimalist training roadmap is with exercise selection. So with a minimalist training approach, you want to place 80 to 90% of your time and focus on big compound exercises. And so there are basically two different types of exercises that you can do in the gym. You can do compound exercises or isolation exercises. Compound exercises are exercises that work multiple joints and muscle groups. So some examples would be like squats, bench presses, deadlifts, overhead presses, chin-ups, rows, and dips. Isolation exercises, on the other hand, are movements that work a single joint and muscle groups. So some examples would be like bicep curls, tricep extensions, calf raises, leg curls, leg extensions, etc., right? And there are basically three reasons why you want to prioritize compound exercises with a minimalist training approach. First, they're the most efficient bang for your buck movements because they work a lot of muscle mass at a time, right? And so the best example I could give for this is that, let's say you're trying to hit your upper body, you're trying to hit your chest, shoulders, and triceps. If you're gonna do that with compound exercises, all you really need is a bench press. Like all you really need to do to hit your chest, shoulders, and triceps effectively is a bench press, right? Whereas if you're trying to do that with isolation exercises, you're gonna need three different movements. You're gonna need something to isolate your chest, something to isolate your triceps, and something to isolate your shoulders, right? And so you've effectively like 3x'd the amount of time that it's taking you to hit the same amount of muscle that you could have hit with just one compound exercise, right? The second reason is that they're very easy to progressively overload. And so compound exercises have a massive strength potential. You can get very strong at them over time, and that's really important from a muscle growth standpoint because really when it comes to building muscle, there's nothing more important than progressive overload. And with compound exercises, you can get so strong at them, right? You can only get so strong at a leg extension, right? But you can get very strong on squats. And really, like the more strength potential an exercise has, the more potential it has to build muscle. The final reason is that you can load compound exercises very heavy. And that's really important because muscle growth is driven by tension, right? And to place tension on your muscles, you need to lift relatively heavy. You can't just be doing sets of like 50 reps on lateral raises and bicep curls and expect to build muscle. You need to have some element of heavy lifting in your training. And the reality is that you can't go that heavy on isolation exercises, right? But you can go very heavy on compound exercises, right? And the reason being is because compound exercises just involve so much more muscle mass, and that just makes it so that you can load them so much heavier, right? And so you might be wondering, like, how do I pick these compound exercises? Like, what's the best framework for doing that? Well, it's actually very, very simple. All you need to do is look at the big 6 movement patterns. And so I have an exercise selection framework that I use for myself and that I use for my clients. I call it like the core 6. You could also call it like the big 6, right? And essentially all that means is that there are basically 6 different movement patterns, big movement patterns. You have squats, you have hip hinges, which is a deadlift of some kind. You have vertical pushes, which is an overhead press of some kind. You have vertical pulls, which is a chin up or a pull up or a lat pull down. You have horizontal pushes, which is a chest press of some kind. And then you have horizontal pulls, which is going to be a row of some kind, right? And so all you really need to do when it comes to exercise selection is to pick a big compound exercise for each of those main movement patterns that works really well for you. That is all you really have to do. If you have a big compound exercise for each of these big movement patterns and you just focus on them, you make them the foundation of your training routine, you just focus on getting really strong at them over time, you're going to build a lot of muscle mass, right? Like that's really all you have to do. Now, in order to make sure that you don't develop any weak points or you bring up lagging muscle groups, you will want to include some isolation exercises, right? The problem is that most people confuse like the purposes of compound exercises and isolation exercises, right? Compound exercises are your substance builders. They are going to yield the most amount of muscle mass on your body, right? Isolation exercises, however, are just there to plug the gaps left by those big compound movements, right? So some small muscle groups aren't going to get hit that effectively through the compound exercises alone. And that's where you want to allocate some isolation work, right? So let's say through doing the big compound exercises, my side delts lag behind. Well, that would be a great place to allocate some isolation work. Maybe I'll do some lateral raises for that, right? Or maybe my biceps have always been a weak point. Well, there I'll throw in a bicep curl, right? And so the main point here is that you just always want to prioritize compound exercises. That should take up like 80 to 90% of your training space and your training time. And then the last 10 to 20% can be allocated towards isolation work in order to bring up the smaller muscle groups that might be lagging behind. If you're a busy guy over 40 and sick of having a dad bod, tired of struggling to lose fat and build muscle, and frustrated because nothing seems to work, I've created a free training that reveals exactly how men over 40 are getting lean, strong, and muscular with just 2 short workouts per week. No restrictive diets or endless cardio sessions. Click the first link in my description to check it out and stop wasting time on methods that do not deliver results. The second pit stop on our minimalist training roadmap is intensity, which refers to how hard you train. So really, the key to making minimalist training work is to train really hard. And training hard just means pushing your sets close to failure. And training close to failure means pushing your sets to where you can no longer move the weight despite exerting maximal effort. And so this is probably the most important thing that you need to understand if you're going to adopt a minimalist training approach. So Arthur Jones, who was the pioneer of high-intensity training, had a saying where he said, you can either train long or you can train hard, but you can't do both. And so fundamentally, what we're doing with a minimalist training plan is we're choosing to train hard instead of long. And what he means with that quote is that there's basically a trade-off between volume and intensity. So volume is the number of exercises and sets that you're doing in any given workout. Intensity is, again, how hard you train, right? And so this is really important for you to understand. The harder you train, the less volume you need to build muscle, right? The more volume you do, the less hard you can train. And so that's this sort of trade-off. And obviously, in order to maximize our training efficiency, in order to get in and out of the gym quickly and still build a ton of muscle mass, we want to do less volume, but push that reduced amount of volume with a lot more effort and intensity, right? So that's what you have to understand. And what this really means is that every single set that you're doing in the gym should be pushed to about 0 reps in reserve, which means that you squeeze out every single rep that you could possibly do using good form on every single set. Most men do not push their training hard enough. They leave about 3 to 5 reps in the tank on any given set. And that's just not going to cut it with a minimalist training approach. Because remember, if you're going to do less volume, you're going to have to train much harder in order to make up for that lack of volume, right? So it's really important that you do not stop when the set gets difficult. You need to squeeze out those last 3 to 5 really, really tough reps before you fail, right? And I'm not saying you actually need to fail your sets. You just want to squeeze out every rep that you're capable of doing using good form, because those last final tough reps are the only ones that actually count towards stimulating muscle growth anyways. The third pit stop on our minimalist training roadmap is volume, which is the number of exercises and sets that you're doing in each workout. And so fundamentally, there are a few different ways that you can go about doing minimalist training. You can train twice a week, or you can train 3 times a week. You could even train once a week if you really wanted to. I've trained once a week for short periods of time, and I've seen really good success doing that. So if you're really strapped on time, you can make really good progress training just once a week. But what I'll do here is I'll give you a little overview of what your total volume should look like from an exercise and sets standpoint for each session if you're doing a twice a week setup or a 3-day per week setup, right? And so if you're training twice a week, what I would recommend is that you do 3 compound exercises and 2 to 3 isolation exercises in each session. You're gonna wanna do just 2 sets per exercise. And yes, that is more than enough if you're training with sufficient intensity. The rule of thumb is that if you ever feel like you need to do more than 2 to 3 sets per exercise, you're not training hard enough and you need to up the effort. So 2 sets per exercise is really the sweet spot. And this is gonna bring you to a total of 10 to 12 sets per session with a twice a week training plan. If you're going to train 3 times a week, I would recommend doing 2 compound exercises and then 2 to 3 isolation exercises per session. Again, you're just going to want to do 2 sets per exercise here. And that's going to bring you to a total of 8 to 10 sets per session. And if you're wondering about rep range really doesn't matter that much. Anywhere between 5 to 20 reps per set can build muscle as long as those sets are pushed close to failure and you strive to add weight to those sets over time. But what I would recommend, what I feel like is the sweet spot, is like 5 to 12 reps per set. That's sort of the sweet spot when it comes to rep range, when it comes to building muscle and also gaining strength. The 4th pit stop on our minimalist training roadmap is workout splits. So workout splits refers to how you actually divide your exercises up, right? And so obviously now we've set the foundation. We've talked about exercise selection, we've talked about intensity, and we've talked about volume in terms of the number of exercises and sets that you should be doing. But now we're actually going to divide those exercises and sets up, right? So I'm going to give you a few different examples. Obviously, how your specific workout routine is going to look will depend on what exercises you select based upon the isolation exercises and the main movement patterns, right? But I'll give you a couple examples of how I would set it up. So my favorite way to do it is with a 2-day split. And so a 2-day split could look like on Monday, your workout A, you're going to do squats, chin-ups, overhead presses, tricep extensions, and calf raises, all for 2 sets each. On Thursday, your workout B, you're gonna do bench presses, Romania deadlifts, rows, lateral raises, and bicep curls, all for 2 sets each. And that's basically a full body twice a week setup. If you're gonna do a 3-day split, what I would recommend is that you follow what I call like an upper, lower, upper split, right? And so how that could look is that on Monday, your workout A, you'll do bench press, rows, bicep curls, and face pulls, all for 2 sets each. On Wednesday, that's gonna be your leg workout. You're gonna do squats, Romanian deadlifts, leg extensions, and leg curls, all for 2 sets each. On Friday, your next upper body workout, you're gonna do chin-ups, overhead presses, tricep extensions, and lateral raises, all for 2 sets each. And if you wanted to train once a week, here's the routine that I would recommend you follow. You're gonna do squats, bench presses, chin-ups, bicep curls, and lateral raises, all for 2 sets each. And you could probably do that like every Monday or pretty much whatever day you want, as long as you're doing it just once a week. The 5th pit stop on our minimalist training roadmap is strength progression, which refers to the actual system that we're going to use to help you progress. Because at this point, we've set a pretty strong foundation, but none of it really matters unless you have a strength progression system in place. Because if you just keep doing the same workouts month after month without any sort of progression system in place, your body is not going to change. Despite, doing the best exercises, following the best workout split, like none of that's going to matter unless you actually progressively overload your training, which means adding weight or reps over time to your exercises and sets, right? And so the best system that I've ever used to achieve progressive overload is called the double progression method. And basically what the double progression method is where you essentially work in a rep range on your sets and you focus on progressing with reps until you hit the top end of the rep range, and then you add a little bit of weight, right? So let's say you're doing squats for sets of 6 to 8 reps with, let's say, 225, right? So on week 1, you're going to try and hit the bottom of the rep range. So you're going to try and get 225 for 6. And then next week on your following workout, you're going to try and add a rep and get 7, right? And then on the workout after that, you're going to try and get 8. And once you've hit 8, you've hit the top end of the rep range, right? The top end of the rep range is 8. And so once you've done that, you're then going to add 5 pounds and go up to 230 pounds and then drop to the bottom of the rep range, which would be 6 reps, and then work your way up again over time. So you're constantly progressing in either reps or weight. And that, from my experience, is the simplest, most efficient progression method that you can use to gain a shit ton of strength and muscle over time. If you're over 40, sick of the dad bod, and frustrated with workouts that do not deliver results, you need to check out the free training in my description that reveals my 2-day per week minimalist training system that's helping men over 40 get lean, strong, and muscular without wasting hours in the gym. You can pick it up completely free by clicking the first link in my description.